Hi everyone! Today's lesson is going to be about books. IELTS Speaking Part 1, topic books and reading. I hope you like to read because this topic is all about those bookworms out there. Let's go ahead and start looking at the questions that we'll work with today. Number 1, do you often read books? When? Number 2, has your reading habit changed since you were young? The first question, do you often read books? Well, we got to look at the wording here. What are the key words and how can we paraphrase or come up with synonyms? Paraphrasing and topical vocab. Do you often read books? Now, these are the first two keywords I see. We can get often and switch it with regularly. Do you regularly read books? Do you usually read books? But we can change read to. We could say something like crack open, which is a lovely idiom. Do you regularly crack open a book? To crack open something means obviously to open something, like you crack open an egg. This can be used in the negative, especially in regards to study. He needs to crack open a few books in order to pass his IELTS exam. Crack open a book. This can also be used in the positive, especially when giving the book an adjective of value. I love cracking open a good book. I often find it hard to set it down. It just means I like reading, I like opening good books, and I can't put it down once I've started reading. I'm addicted to this book. Do you often read books? Well, we're talking about often, so some vocabulary we could consider is regularly, usually, generally, or frequently. That means you do read books. But if you don't read books often, you can use don't plus that positive vocab, i.e., don't usually read books. Or perhaps you just hate books. You don't read books. You rarely read books. You never read books. You seldomly read books, or maybe it's very uncommon for you to read books. Some more idiom or phrases to consider could be hardly ever, once in a blue moon, almost never, or on rare occasions. I love once in a blue moon. It's such a good idiom to talk about something that doesn't happen often or doesn't happen frequently. Once in a blue moon. Or maybe you want to be more positive. So maybe when you have the opportunity or you have the chance, you like to read books. Or maybe you find yourself with some time when you have time to read books. You like to settle down with a nice book, or maybe curl up with a good book. Those are great phrases to kind of describe how you view reading. I like the phrase settle down. You can settle down with a good book. You can settle down with a good movie. Settle down kind of just means calm down. You're going to relax. To curl up means you're in a position where your body is curled. You're curled up with a good book. So, do you often read books? When you have the opportunity, when you find yourself some time, when you settle down with a nice book, or when you curl up with a good book, those are all nice ways to describe how you feel about reading. Some more idioms or phrases to consider. Do you ever get lost in the pages of a good book? You're so interested in the book, you don't know what's going on. A book is a real page turner. It's so interesting, you keep turning the pages. Are you a bookworm? Do you consume books? Do you love books? Then you're a bookworm. Or maybe you always have your nose in a book. All right, now let's look at this example. Do you often read books? I don't often have the chance to read books for fun. Most of the time, when I am reading for school assignments. Only once in a blue moon do I find myself with some time to settle down with a nice book, usually to relax and wind down before bed, or when traveling long distances. The strategy here is to answer the question, I don't often read books, and then when do I read books? Let's look at a second example. You can often find me with my nose in a book when I have some free time. I especially love reading science fiction books, but regularly end up reading one of my favorite classic comics, such as One Piece or Case Closed. I know in some countries it's Detective Conan. My strategy here is I'm telling you if I read books often, and then what kind of books do I read? Let's look at the second question. Have your reading habits changed since you were young? This is a question about changing. It's a great way to compare and contrast. We'll talk about how we read when we were young and how we're reading now. But of course, let's look at some topical vocab before we get started with answering the question. Have your reading habits changed since you were young? Let's look at some positive language. Interested in or obsessed with. I was interested in comic books and obsessed with the strong lead characters and their fantastic adventures. These phrases are just great synonyms to talk about if you like reading what you might have been interested in. You could also use the words fascinated with or enthralled by. I was fascinated with everything that had to do with dragons. I was enthralled by the magic and mystery of it all. Again, we're looking at synonyms. You can also say you were attracted to, drawn to, curious about, or immersed in. Now, I'm much more attracted to science fiction. I get immersed in the plots. Currently, I'm more drawn to K-dramas and romantic comedies. Let's look at some negative language, maybe unenthusiastic about, disinterested in, or apathetic to. Those words all mean that you don't have interest in, you're not really interested in reading. Or maybe you could talk about how it's changed. Has your reading habits developed? Have they evolved? Have they grown? This all means that they're changing in a positive direction, whereas diminished is a negative change. You diminish a fire. It means to die out. I was pretty unenthusiastic about reading in the past, or I have been uninterested in reading since I was a child. I've always been apathetic to reading. I hope this isn't about any of you, but it is always good to give us positive and negative examples. Some more idioms to consider. Do you pick up or to pick something up? It means to take an interest in. I picked up reading when I was about 6 years old. I loved reading books with my grandmother before bed. And we can talk about why. Maybe I like to read in my spare time, or maybe as time went by, my reading habit diminished. I read to kill time, or my days were filled with a verb such as reading. Maybe reading leaves you bored to tears or bored to death. You've been reading less and less, or maybe you've been reading more and more. Bored to tears or bored to death. This idiom means you're so bored you're upset, or so bored you want to cry. All right, let's look at another example response. I picked up reading when I was very young. I remember always being surrounded by books during my childhood. Unfortunately, I'm afraid, my passion for reading has only diminished as I've gotten older. Now, with my intensive schedule, I never can find the time to read as a way to pass the time. With this example, I probably wouldn't use time twice in the last sentence, but I wanted to show you how we could use these words in a reference to changing or comparing the past to the present. Let's look at a second example response. When I was young, I had a library card and would go every week to check out a new stack of books. Now, I seldom have the chance to read for fun. However, whenever I get some downtime, I always like to crack open a good book. Again, it's a simple compare and contrast. When I was younger, I went all the time, but now I'm much too busy. I have too much on my plate to crack open a good book. All right, guys, you got an assignment / some homework. Do you often read books? When? Has your reading habit changed since you were young? If you want to follow along with these studies and you want to submit a video or a response to these questions, please put it in the comments because I would be happy to give some feedback to the first few commenters who provide a video or audio file of your answer. Well, that's the end for today. Subscribe for more videos weekly. I know I'm a little busy, but I'm uploading lessons all the time. Thank you. Goodbye.